They got their positioning right. They got leads coming in, qualified leads. They're booking demos, they're booking sales calls, and then they get on the sales call and they mess it all up.
Hello, welcome to the Better Outcomes Show, where we explore the possibilities of a new healthcare. Each episode, we bring you a conversation with leaders across the healthcare industry, exploring topics ranging from new treatment techniques and interventions to novel service delivery methods and business models. And now your host, Rafi Salazar from RehabU Practice Solutions, a leader in patient engagement and retention strategy. Let's explore the possibilities of a new healthcare.
Hey there, Rafi Salazar from RehabU Practice Solutions, and got a question for you. Do you want to differentiate your healthcare technology, your device, your software, or your solution, even your provider organization, from your competitors? Do you want to align your solution or your healthcare service with your targeted healthcare buyer? And do you want to create a consistent message that drives business in the form of qualified leads and ultimately sales? If the answer is yes to any of those questions, check out the Healthcare Alignment Workshop. We call it the Healthcare Positioning Alignment Workshop, where we help you develop an effective value proposition that targets your identified and ideal healthcare buyer. Obviously, there's 4 different stakeholders in healthcare, and depending on who you're wanting to target and who you're wanting to talk to, you're going to have to change your message a little bit to align your values, align the incentives, and just make the conversation flow a little more efficiently and really ultimately more effectively towards your end goal, which is hopefully providing value to your customers, which means you got to sell and get them to adopt your solution, your service, or even just sign up for whatever program you have. If that's something you're interested in learning more about, we can help you do that. Takes 90 minutes, and then probably in a week you've got what we call your healthcare positioning deck, which basically guides all of your marketing, your sales, even your conversations in demos and in sales conversations with prospective clients. You can learn more about that at positioning.rehabupracticesolutions.com. That's positioning.rehabupracticesolutions.com. Alrighty, this week we are doing a little bit of a dive again into the healthcare business side of things. Last week we had an interview about developing and uncovering and really having conversations around value in the healthcare innovation or technology space. A lot of that carries over into other forms of business, whether you're running a healthcare organization, a service organization, or you're running a healthcare tech company or something like that. So this week we're pivoting a little bit to actually having those business conversations, those sales conversations, if you would. Now, I'm going to look here on LinkedIn because this episode kind of comes from a couple posts recently that I did over the last couple weeks. It just got a lot of traction. I figured, you know what, maybe it's worth doing a full-length episode on it. So the first post was, "You're doing healthcare sales wrong." And this is not groundbreaking stuff, but it's worth reiterating. I said at least a lot of people are doing healthcare sales wrong, specifically in the tech space, in the innovation space. I work with a lot of companies who are going to market. They're targeting their ideal healthcare buyer. They're getting, they got their positioning right. They got leads coming in, qualified leads. They're booking demos, they're booking sales calls, and then they get on the sales call and they mess it all up, or they don't get purchases, right? Well, what's happening there? I think the idea here that I want to drive home is that a lot of times in healthcare sales discussions, whether you're in a provider organization, you're talking with prospective patients, or you're a healthcare technology or solutions vendor or provider, and you're talking with prospective clinics and healthcare organizations that are going to hopefully buy your product or your service, part of the problem is when we get into these sales conversations, because that's what they are. People don't like to think of them like that. They like to call them a demo or a discovery call, or maybe like on the healthcare provider side, we call it like an inquiry. Someone's calling about a service or something like that, a booking an evaluation or consultation. They're all sales calls, which means you need to understand what sales are, how you do them right, and how you can mess them up and do them wrong. So how do you do them right? The best advice I got on this was by a guy named Blair Enns. He runs Win Without Pitching. I know I've mentioned them on the show a lot, because I really leaned on a lot of I went through their program years ago when I was like first going out on my own as an individual independent healthcare consultant. And a lot of those principles I've realized really just carry over very well into healthcare. So one of the things that Blair Enns talks about in Win Without Pitching, the book, and some of their other, the book is called Win Without Pitching, and then they have another book called Pricing Creativity. Both of them are awesome. I recommend them both. One of the things they mention in the book is the idea of, in sales, any kind of sales situation, it becomes very easy to go into like present mode. We want to highlight the benefits, the features, talk about us and our company and what we do for clients and the outcomes we create and yada, yada, yada. And at the end of like a 30-minute, 40-minute sales call or demo call, you realize that the client or a potential client has talked maybe 5% of the time, and the rest of the time was us talking at them, right? We're presenting, and then we're saying, so do you want to buy it? And the answer is 9 times out of 10 going to be, no, I need to think about it, or you give me a bunch of information, yada, yada, yada. And that can be a big hang up for a couple reasons. One, you get a lot more no's than you get yeses. But then 2, you're extending that sales cycle out much longer than it needs to be. And especially if you're a startup, you're bootstrapping the company maybe, or you just got a little bit of funding or whatever it is, there's constraints. You can't take 3 years to close business. You got to do it sooner. How do we bypass some of that? The way we do it is we avoid presenting and we start having conversations. And we'll hopefully be having another guest on the show in it'll probably be a month or two because they're traveling Europe right now. But I'm excited about bringing it to you because this person grew and scaled a large organization, exited for very handsome payout. And he and I were talking, and they said, you know what, like, this is one of the big things. After I made this post, he was like, this is one of those big things that I kind of resonate with too, because a lot of people, they get into trying to sell, quote unquote, and they don't, and they miss understanding. So let me back up then. So a lot of people are doing healthcare sales conversations wrong. How are they doing it wrong? They're not doing anything crazy or egregious. They're not spamming people on LinkedIn messaging, which, if you're doing that, please stop. It's annoying. We all hate it. But they're messing things up when they get to the actual conversation piece. They spend most of the time, like I said, having conversations with or not even having conversations, talking with the prospective prospect, presenting them with the value add, with the discussion, with the features, the benefits, the potential outcomes. But they miss the most important part, or the most important opportunity in that call, which is understanding the prospective client situation, their context, and the value drivers. Because ultimately, if you don't understand that for this specific patient, you're not going to make the sale for this specific patient. And every conversation and every organization that you're selling into, while some of the core features might be, or the core factors might be present among all of them, right? Like if you're selling to physical therapy practices, for example, a lot of the value drivers are going to be similar. A lot of the circumstances and the context will be similar, but they're going to be specific situations with this clinic or this practice and the way they do X, Y, Z, and how your solution will or won't fit into those workflows that can be make or break it for whether or not they buy the product from you, or whether they sign up for a subscription, or whatever it is. So what I like to tell people when I work with clients, when I work with organizations, is all sales, including healthcare sales, need to first start with a simple conversation, and that conversation has 2 main goals. The first goal is to understand the prospective client's situation and the nature of the problem they are seeking to solve. Because if you go in there thinking that, our main value proposition is an efficiency gain, and the organization that you're speaking with, while efficiency might be on the list of priorities, it's not as high, maybe revenue generation is. You need to be able to tailor your conversation and highlight those features in order to get closer to a yes, to a value creation on both ends. And then you need to determine, the other piece is determining whether there's a good enough fit between your solution, your device, your software, and the problem that your prospective client or prospective customer is hoping to solve, and whether that warrants moving to the next step. A lot of times we spend so much time presenting that we miss that second piece, that is there even a fit here? Is this the right time? Is there another solution that you'd be better served with? Waiting too long to get to that, to answer that question, is where a lot of organizations go wrong. They spend time, they spend energy, they spend resources and just emotional bandwidth or cognitive bandwidth of their people going down paths that they shouldn't go down, because at the end, we're not the right solution for you because of XYZ, or you say this is your priority, that doesn't align with where we're going as an organization. We should have said no 3 meetings ago, but now we've burnt up 3 hours of your time, of our time. No one wins. Sometimes the answer to is this a good fit is no, and that's fine, right? But it's not fine to waste too much time getting to that answer. So there's another book out there, I can't remember who wrote it. I think the answer is like start with no or getting to know. And the whole idea is in a sales conversation, the faster you can throw up potential barriers or objections and determine whether or not you can overcome them, means the faster you're going to get to a yes or a no. And like a no sometimes being looked at as, oh, that's bad, it can actually be really good if it comes really, really quickly, right? If in the first 5 minutes of a conversation, 10 minutes of a conversation, you can understand, oh, this is not a good fit client for us. Their expectations are going to be off from what we can provide, or they're just focused on something totally different strategically than we're doing. You can say, you know what, this has been great. I can already tell, like this probably isn't going to work out. But I do know, maybe somebody you can refer them to, right? Another organization, another solution, another service or provider or something like that. And you're going to understand and you're going to realize a couple things. One, your cost to acquire a customer is going to go way down if you do that. And then two, you might end up getting referrals from that organization because they're going to understand, okay, this person wasn't just trying to sell me garbage that I don't need. They were really interested in kind of understanding my situation. When they understood it, they realized they couldn't provide value and they said no, and that saved both of our times. That will be a win-win in and of itself. So the goal in an initial conversation or discovery call or a demo or whatever is to understand whether or not you should even continue having a conversation. The faster you answer that question, the more efficient your sales process becomes. So what I always tell people is stop presenting and trying to onboard prospects within that first call, right? What you want to do is spend more time trying to understand that prospective customer's situation and then see if there's a fit. And if the fit is yes, then you move down the process. You move down the steps, right? And that's really what a dialed in healthcare sales system or business development system should look like. There should be, okay, we're going to have an initial conversation, and this is like a qualifying conversation. We're having a discussion here, not about the features, about the benefits. Sure, we'll talk about that if that makes sense. But the real purpose of the discussion is to determine whether or not we should be even having this discussion or a subsequent conversation, right? And then, so that post got a lot of traction. But one of the big hangups that somebody posted here was that, okay, well, maybe we'll dive into this, was like, how do you even have like set up that conversation in the first place when there's challenges in identifying that prospect, getting in contact with them. They basically said, there's something missing here. That's a great post or whatever, but there's a piece missing here that I think precedes it, and that's understanding, being able to reach the prospect. So at least in this area where this company is operating, the prospect is protected by front desks or other forms of gatekeepers, maybe a form on the website. I'm sure there are many of us in blank industry that had to learn the hard way or are learning the hard way. But this barrier is real. Even if we want to lead with value, we want to start with understanding, if you never get that conversation, you can never practice this, right? So basically the point of the question in this comment was, how do we even get to the point where we're having these conversations, right? So like kind of preceding this, which is a valid point. I get that all the time. Sometimes people are driving a bunch of leads and their problem is qualifying the leads. This person's problem is we're not even getting a foot in the door. We're not even getting these initial conversations scheduled because there's barriers to that, whether it be a gatekeeper, if you're trying to sell to like private practice, healthcare facilities. Sometimes you're dealing with like a front office or an admin staff that's really, really good at shielding the principal decision maker from even getting in contact with you, right? So I had a few solutions here, or a few tactics and strategies. And I'm going to lay them out 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll kind of dive into them. So I'm a big proponent of, and I've said this before on multiple podcasts, on multiple other interviews that I've been on different podcasts and different shows and presentations and keynote addresses on business development and healthcare. Ultimately, what you want is inbound, right? You ultimately want prospects that kind of know what you're doing, they understand you, they've explored your solution or your potential solution, and now they're just reaching out to figure out how to work with you. Those are the best, the most ideal pre-qualified leads you can get. But that's a long tail strategy to get those, and sometimes you don't have the runway from a cash flow standpoint to wait a year and a half to spin up some of these business development things. So what I tell people is you want to do it in tandem. You want to have your long-term, call it a flywheel, call it a funnel. You want to have your long-term business development strategy that's going to take 12 to 18 months to really dial in. You want to build that in tandem with paid. So the good news is you can build them both at the same time because they're kind of built on the same foundation, which is a strong positioning, which again, we do with our clients, the healthcare positioning alignment workshop. Talked about that at the beginning of the show. You can go to that link, learn more about it. But basically what you want to do is a few steps. Number one, you want to develop that unique point of view or a unique point of view around that positioning that you've crafted, the problem you're going to solve, and then use that point of view to create content. It's a long-term strategy for sure, but you want to start building that out in the beginning so that once the apparatus is up and running, once you've got the content and the traffic coming organically, it provides plenty of inbound leads. The downside of the content strategy is that it takes time. The benefit, though, is that one, it will be hopefully like an evergreen kind of inbound lead generator for you. The second benefit is that once you have the content in place, when you're paying for ads and paying for traffic for an offer, the reality is most of those people that you pay for that are going to come on the landing page or whatever are not going to sign up for a demo right away. They're going to want to explore you, kind of research the company, research the solution, kind of see how you view the problem that they're trying to solve to see if there's a fit. So you're going to need that content anyways. The question is just whether or not you're paying for that traffic or whether it's going to be more organic. So develop that positioning, build a unique point of view around that positioning and the problem that you're hoping to solve for your prospective clients, and then build content around that. Step 2 is focus on content creation and marketing efforts that positions you as an industry expert. So maybe it's speaking at conferences, maybe it's doing podcast interviews, maybe it's hosting webinars, free webinars or something like that, developing free resources that can be downloaded. These all can be good avenue to drive inbound inquiries and attract your ideal customer, because it gives you the opportunity to speak to that ideal customer and to share that point of view. A lot of times, the worst thing you can do in healthcare sales in general, but like let's talk devices or softwares or something like that, it's very easy to commoditize it, to talk about, these are the features, these are the benefits, yada, yada, yada. And what ends up happening is then you just become one in a sea of many, and the question stops becoming what's the value they're providing and what is the cost and how low can I get it? And that's not where you want to be in any kind of sales conversation. So you want to take the time to cultivate this perception of your organization as being thoughtful leaders in the space. For a couple reasons that I've already mentioned, it kind of positions you higher up on the rung in the value ladder. For sales conversations, you're not really viewed as a vendor anymore. You're viewed as like a consultative advisor or something like that. So that's 1 and 2. Number 3 is in the beginning, you're going to want to supplement those first 2 strategies, because number 1 and number 2, the creating content, being on podcasts, speaking at organizations, doing webinars. All of those are, if you think about the types of content that is out there, it's very much educational in nature, which means that you are already being seen as an authority or as an expert. And that kind of content brings in and drives higher quality leads because they're going to see you as somebody who is teaching, who is an expert, or who has experience in this area, which means they're going to see you and view you at a higher level than this is just somebody that sells a bunch of software to a bunch of healthcare clinics, right? Problem is, again, it takes time to get that content out, whether it be organic or paid. So in the beginning, you're going to want to supplement those first two strategies, those kind of teaching, education, consultative, resource developing, organic traffic methods. You're going to want to supplement them with paid advertisement and cold outreach. I'm a big fan of leveraging paid media to drive clinic owners or decision makers to some sort of free lead magnet of some kind. Can be whatever you want. It can be a low ticket item, 30, 40, 50 bucks for a resource guide, or it can be totally free, whatever. That's up to you and your business decisions and strategy and all that. Because it'll fill that top end of the lead nurture sequence. Because as you're creating that content, you've already got a list of people now that you can feed that content to already, that have already raised their hands a little bit and said, I'm interested in the solution that you're providing to this problem, right? And that can be in and of itself a way to generate those sales conversations, those leads, those whatever. So lead nurturing and conversions and conversations are the same or similar, regardless of whether it's an organic lead or one that you've paid for. A lot of that is going to be the same. In fact, I've had people on my email list at RehabU for years that I'm just now having conversations with. So it takes time in a lot of situations. It's not that someone's going to see your solution and sign up right away. It's going to take some time, and you want to have a system in place for doing that. So that's going to be your CRM, your email automations. You can set all that up or pay somebody to do that for you. But the key is going to be, the foundational piece of that is going to be your content, because that's going to feed your point of view. That's going to indoctrinate those leads in how you view the problem, how you go about solving it for clients, et cetera, getting them aligned. And then the last piece, outside of paid advertising to drive traffic into that stuff you're creating, is cold outreach. Now, this is like the bottom rung of lead generation, if you think about it. It requires a large or high volume of outreach efforts for very small conversion rates, but it's necessary in the beginning, right? Because sometimes you don't have a list, you don't have an audience or a way to generate traffic just yet. So you're going to need to generate those leads through cold outreach. Now, the cold outreach is the lowest rung on lead generation. They're usually the leads that are going to take the most time to close, because they don't really know anything about you. They didn't even know that you existed. They might not even be in a situation where they understand or realize or recognize the problem that you're going to solve, et cetera, et cetera. So I get asked all the time by clients, well, how do we close more of these types of leads? Because we don't have a list. We don't have an audience. We don't have people that are kind of warmed up. Our only option right now to generate sales is smiling and dialing. And I wish I had a silver bullet that was like, boom, do this and you're going to close 50% of all the cold calls or cold visits even to clinics and stuff like that. The reality is it's not. It's a numbers game, and you have to understand that, which means two things. One, you need to give yourself a little bit of leeway and understand that it is a losing battle, cold sales, which is why you want to be building those content pieces, the email automations, the lead nurturing from the beginning, so that as you're hopefully getting some success in the cold call, cold lead generation, you're padding a lot of the back end for future business development with content that you've created, resources that are going to drive business, all of that. And sometimes it's even nice to be able to take one of those cold calls and say, you know what, I'm going to shoot you an email. It's an article we just wrote, or a white paper we just published, or resource guide. Read it over. Let me think. Let me know what you think, etc. So again, going back to this question of how do we get in front of our ideal prospect if we don't have a list already, if we don't have or maybe we just scraped a list from like some kind of business website or something like that. We don't have an audience curated already for this content. How do we get in front of them? I have found that a couple things work. Again, caveat here, a lot of cold calling is hearing the response, thanks, we're not interested, or don't call us again, or whatever. So if you have any kind of fear of rejection or you're worried about that, it's going to be difficult for you. But the reality is it is through discomfort that we grow as professionals and as organizations. So it's going to be one of those things you're going to have to kind of just do, at least in the beginning. There are some things you can do to make it easier. I've always found that leading with value tends to be effective, even on cold calls. And what I mean by lead by value is you don't want to start by saying, hey, I'm Rafi, I work at ABC International, and we're trying to help clinic owners with our software, or whatever it is. You don't want to lead like that. Sometimes if you can position what you're doing as part of a project or a research piece or insight generation, you'll get a little bit more of a higher likelihood of a yes. You'll decrease some of those barriers because initially you're not having a sales conversation. You're not trying to pitch them on this cold call. You're saying something like, hey, I'm Rafi, I work with ABC International, and we have an idea for a product. And we're trying to explore whether or not it's viable. And the way we're doing that really is we're having conversations with a lot of companies that are kind of in your size. And the idea is we're doing a big survey, maybe across the nation, maybe across the city, however you want to do it, pick your locale. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this together in a big report that we're going to make public to everybody. You can get a copy of it if you want to. And we're going to benchmark industry trends around this problem or this solution or whatever. Is that something you'd be interested in? We'd love like 10 minutes of your time just to kind of understand maybe your business, what drives your business a little bit, or what drives your decisions around XYZ. And we're going to take that and we're going to lump it in with the hundreds of others that we're going to get, and we're going to put together this report. Something like that is great. Or you can even do an interview. I'm interviewing private healthcare practice owners to find out how they're integrating technology in their healthcare process or practice or delivery. That's always an easy one. Anything where you can lead with not, I'm trying to sell you something, but I'm trying to get insights about you. I'm trying to understand your thing. Maybe there's like, listen, I run a podcast, or I'm writing a book, or whatever it is around this topic, and I'd love to feature you. I'd love to explore whether or not you'd be a good fit for it. Is that something you're interested in? And that's going to give you a lot more yeses than nos. Because if nothing else, you're going to pique somebody's interest and say, okay, like what are they trying? What kind of resources are they developing? What kind of podcast is this? What kind of show or whatever? And that tends to be a little bit, I've found success in it. One of the main reasons I started the podcast back in 2020 was that there were people that would not give me the time of day if I had just called and said, hey, I'm a consultant and I'm trying to do XYZ. Can we have a conversation? And those people wouldn't give me the time of day, but they would give me the time of day if I said, hey, I'm starting a podcast. The podcast is on healthcare innovation. I'm trying to interview people that have expertise in XYZ. And oftentimes those people that were on the podcast early on, they either became clients of mine or they referred me to people who became clients of mine. But that wasn't the initial reason for having the call. The initial reason for having the call was for me to understand their situation. It was market research for me, but then it also was a way for me to lead with value and to create content, because that content ended up, an interview with a doctor, for example, might change my thinking about the way this solution needs to be structured, or this solution happens, or maybe the nature of the problem. So it was a way for me to grow my expertise and insight in this area without having to basically sound like a sleazy salesperson, which I don't want to do. Like I want to have conversations with people. If it works well, if it looks like we might be able to do something together, great. If not, okay. In fact, I just had a sales conversation with somebody last week, and they said, okay, well, aren't you going to give me a pitch or something like that about your services or whatever? And I said, no, not really. This is what I do. This is how I help clients. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what's going on with you? And, if it makes sense, I can give you we can talk about what working together might look like. But I'm not into doing presentations and all that. And we had a 40-minute conversation about their business, their startup, where they came from, where they were, the problems they were facing. And this one, ultimately, I was like, you know what? You don't really seem like you'd be a good fit for what I do. It seems like you've got this piece dialed in, but I've got a colleague that does XYZ. I'm going to connect y'all via email, and y'all two can take it from there. If you end up needing something from me in the future, let me know. And I want to say they ended up agreeing to do a podcast interview, so we'll do a podcast interview or something like that. So it's like a self-feeding machine both ways. So what I tell people is, if you can find a project that you're working on, maybe it is a piece of content, like the content you're creating can be market insights, market research from prospective customers and prospective clients. Like, that can be very valuable as well. If you can find a way for it all to feed into one another, then you're doing one piece of work or creating one piece of content and being used for multiple things, right? Like, the podcast for me for a while was one piece of content would lead to videos, would lead to articles, and it would lead to sales conversations and sales calls and consulting work. And it was a way to consolidate my efforts. So I would encourage you to think about doing something like that if you're in the position of, we need to have these conversations. We're not having these conversations. We're just now starting to build out our content strategy. We don't have an audience or a curated list yet. So we're going to be doing a lot of cold calling. Cold calling becomes much more, I'm not going to say, like, again, it's going to be low percentages, but it becomes much more, like, notably more successful if you're leading with some sort of value or some sort of purpose for the call outside of, we're trying to pitch you on our product. So that would be my advice around that. So those three initial things: the paid content, outside of paid content, the lowest rung is cold calls. The question is, how do you succeed in cold calls? And the answer to that is, you try to lead with value, which leads to the second post that I made that garnered, again, a lot of responses. It was, how do you lead with value on a healthcare sales call? Do you start by explaining how your product or your service works to drive revenue or decrease costs for your customer? Maybe. When I work with clients and prospective clients, primarily in, like, the healthcare startup world or the healthcare tech companies, on go-to-market and positioning strategy, the first thing we do is develop a strong positioning statement. Again, the Healthcare Positioning Alignment Workshop, positioning.rehabupracticesolutions.com. But this is what I tell people. You start with this positioning, because that's going to drive your value proposition, and that's going to be like the tip of your spear for business development. Doing this changes the dynamic of the sales call or demo, because instead of, like, desperately trying to throw value darts at the prospect and seeing which one hits, hoping that one of them lands near the center for your prospect, you lead with a clearly defined value proposition and then follow up with a question. And that question leads to another question, that leads to another question, that leads to another question. And the goal of these calls stops being, like, get them to say yes or take another meeting, and starts being, again, let's understand whether or not this is a good fit. So in order to get to that piece, you need to have a strong value proposition and a strong positioning strategy in place so that you know who to target and kind of those questions to ask. This type of conversation is better for everybody, right? Because if the answer is no, you generally get to that realization much faster, which means you're not wasting your time, you're not wasting your customer's time or prospective customer's time, and you're able to move on to the next one, right? So yeah, that's the big one. It's a time savings thing, right? You get to this realization faster when you first take the time to understand that prospect's business situation, the problems they're facing, and whether your service or solution is a good fit. I've already mentioned that, right? It saves the prospect time, it saves you time, and it also helps you understand what are the customers that I'm able to create high value for. Because when you understand that, then you're able to target them more specifically in your calls. So that positioning strategy should drive all of your subsequent business development decisions. So the prospects that you target, like I said, you'll understand who the highest value is that you're able to create, or where the highest value is, the methods of lead generation and outreach, the structure of those initial conversations, and the future development of product or service for you. So you want to become seen, again, less as a vendor and more of a discerning professional who's looking for customers who you can best help, not just a customer that will sign up. So again, content creation, positioning strategy, all of that falls into the methods of lead generation that I was talking about. If you have a solid positioning, if you know who you're serving well or who your target market is, then the content that you're creating will be that self-feeding machine, right? Whether it is reaching out to prospects cold and funneling them through an interview series to help develop a white paper or a report or a survey, that survey is going to be more valuable for you because you're going to be serving it up for that ideal customer. So that's all I've got on the topic of doing healthcare sales, sales conversations, demo conversations, the idea, the philosophy behind it, and how I try to work with clients on it. And then some of those things you can do around the cold call thing. So if this was valuable to you, I'd love to hear about it. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn. Shoot me an email, info@rehabupracticesolutions.com. And if you've got a question, maybe a follow-up question or something like that, maybe I'll do a webinar on this idea of healthcare sales conversations. If that's something interesting to you, again, hit me up on LinkedIn or let me know via email, and we'll get that in the works. And I think that's it. If you found the show valuable, head on over to iTunes. You can leave us a rating and review, but really just share it with somebody. Share the show with somebody you think would find it valuable and insightful, because that, I feel like, is more impactful than the ratings and reviews. I feel like we've got some of those on the iTunes already. So just share it. Share the show. Until the next time, folks, be safe, be healthy. I will talk to you then.
Thanks for listening to the Better Outcomes Show, where we explore the possibilities of a new healthcare. Our hope is that you walk away from each episode informed, equipped, and empowered to push the boundaries in your own practice or business. We want to give you the tools to help you build strong, long-lasting relationships with your patients and clients, helping meet their goals, improve their health, and achieve better outcomes. Learn more at www.rehabupracticesolutions.com. We'll catch you on the next episode.